Before the world knew about Kubala Kingdom, long before it infested the highlands of Scotland, Kubala Kingdom existed in daddies, seductive surgeries, and in the pews of the Agape cult. It didn't start with the homelessness, the tents in the woods, or the trespassing on private land. What if I told you Kubala Kingdom actually started off from ultimate betrayal and Jean Gasho's escape from a highly manipulative and abusive cult? By the end of this video, you're going to know the origins of Kubala Kingdom, the persecution of Jean Gasho, who's the queen that founded it, and her descent into madness. One suggestion that I have for everyone who's going to view this video is that you watch it completely through until the end. The chapters that I'm going to put underneath the videos are not going to do it any justice because this is messy. Before you watch this, I have 3 disclaimers. The first disclaimer is that Queen Andy can both be a perpetrator as well as a victim, and those terms are not mutually exclusive. She is in fact a victim of the abuse that she went through at the Agape cult, but she is also perpetrating abuse as of late on Akura Taylor. So I know this is going to humanize her a bit, but I do not want to set aside the fact that she is in fact still very much a villain in the current Kubala Kingdom. The second disclaimer is that this is going to have themes of SA and PDF files, as well as forms of mental and emotional abuse, as well as public humiliation. And if you do not want to have to deal with this type of energy right now, it's okay. You can click off, watch something that makes you smile. My third disclaimer is that these are all my opinions. I have looked at a blog that was written, I've read articles on the news about the case, and so I encourage you guys to do your own research and come to your own opinion. This is going to be part 1 out of a 3-part series, so I just want you guys to get settled, get snuggled in. We are going to dive deep into the origins of Kubala Kingdom, the 10-year conviction that kicked everything off, and the meaning of the number 666 that had everything to do with the disintegration and deterioration of the mind of Jean Gasho. Mary Toma, born as Jean Gasho, was born to Mama Gasho and Papa Gasho in Zimbabwe on the 1st of August 1982. She also had a brother, an estranged brother named Lloyd Gasho, and she moved to the United Kingdom at 17, where she worked as a part-time agent as well as assisting in a nursing home. Then at 18, she then married her first husband, Shangi Mosuka, and honestly, after 10 years of a blissful marriage, all hell breaks loose because they got involved in this cult. Now, I got a lot of information from her blog, and the blog I think is credible because the guy actually got arrested for a lot of the things that she was accusing him for in this blog. Jean has titled this blog, "He Really Was My Daddy." Remember, daddy's seductive surgeries? Keep it in mind. So she called this blog "He Was My Daddy." And in this blog, she really does kind of like a diarying of a lot of the things that would happen surrounding this cult and, of course, her escape from it. And apparently when Jean had gone to the news about all of this that was happening, she was actually instructed by the newscaster and the investigators to leave the blog up. And this was very instrumental because since her blog was left up, it gave other women voices to actually come forward. And guess who came forward? 2 minors, a 15-year-old girl and a 16-year-old girl. So the blog opens up and it has this opening on every page. And she says, "I may be but a tiny drop in the ocean, but even a tiny drop can sparkle. Cruelly abused by a religious man who controlled me, I will fight for my right to believe in a loving God. I am not ashamed to bear whatever stigma that comes with a woman in my situation, abused, betrayed, and humiliated. I am not afraid either. Deep down in my spirit, I yearn for justice, and I believe there is justice somewhere, somehow, waiting for me." That was really touching. Super powerful, right? So she goes in, and this is the first blog post, and this was done on Monday the 7th of October 2013. So the first page of the blog was reminiscent of the title. It was called He Was Really My Daddy. And it goes to show you here through what she types that she really looked up to this man. She would describe herself as worshipping the ground that he walked on, following him almost everywhere, talking to him almost every day for hours on end, and she really felt like he was her eternal spiritual father. And in fact, he made her feel that way. He preached a doctrine that encouraged his cult members to distance themselves and disown their parents, families, and friends. When you look at a lot of their interaction, when you read the blog, you would see that he would encourage people to look at him as this eternal loving father. And essentially, Jean Gasho formed this really unhealthy connection with this man that caused her to almost infantilize herself. And infantilization really did happen, because later on you will see that certain key things that she should have taken control of and attacked certain opportunities and clutched them tightly, but she waited for approval from daddy. So she goes to talk about how she felt like a lost little girl and that her hero had found her. This guy swept her off her feet. He would imply that she and him had this special connection, and she would call him his baby girl and his most beloved daughter. And I know you're seeing the manipulation happening already, because this guy also has a stepdaughter, and it just feels weird. You already decided to be the parent who stepped up for somebody before you met this person, and now you're just flooding them with all of these compliments. All of a sudden, Jean looks into his eyes and she said she just feels to call him daddy. And she just looks at him and she does it, and he smiles back at her and gives her a hug. Now, these hugs are going to come back to haunt us, because they are special hugs and they're anointed and blessed by God. Think of Jesus, because that's what is given in my head. It's giving Jesus Christ of Nazareth. You know how when people would just touch his garments, touch his robe, and be healed and stuff? This is what is given. People would generally just so excited to get hugs, and these hugs are going to come back to haunt us later, so just keep that in mind. So she said she fell into his arms, he hugged her, and she said he was my daddy. Then she goes on. She said that she didn't really like him at first, but she felt like something connected her to him. And what was that something? Simple, plain old brainwashing. Because she even said that she also felt uncomfortable calling him daddy, but he made it seem like it was just so normal and it was okay to call him that. So she did. And she then goes on in the first page to say, don't really think anything crazy about the name daddy. Everyone called him that name. This man had so much power over these women that you would have 500 grown women in a place screaming, daddy, daddy, daddy. And literally they would throw their coats on the ground for him to walk on. And that would be to get his anointing and to be blessed. He says women who are 45 years old and up, they're jumping up and down, screaming, hoping to get a touch from daddy and crying. So who was daddy? Well, daddy was Dr. Walter Masocha, and he was very intelligent, and she describes him as very respectable, very kind, very polite, and very intelligent. He was a holder of multiple PhDs, and he was a former university lecturer at the time. These are the things that we would notice about Dr. Masocha. So on the surface, he appeared to be a really lovely person, but he had deep horrors lurking within. And I think when Jean came to the church, I think he narrowed in on Jean because she didn't like him. And he felt, as narcissists often do, that they have to have everyone in the circle fall in love with them. Otherwise, if you start asking questions, if you start probing, they are going to start distancing themselves from you and abusing you, which eventually happened. So fast forward 2 years after meeting this man, she's now homeless, a single mother, separated from her husband with 3 children, living in a kind of social services arrangement. And she now just feels like her whole world was just tugged from under her feet. That's how it normally happens when these cult leaders, with whatever mental health disorder that they have, they feel like you are going to jeopardize what they have going on. They will literally switch on you, 180 turn, and you are left trying to fathom why this happened. You can't believe it. cognitive dissonance. You might even want to trust this person even more and try to prove yourself to this person even more, even after this person has clearly discarded you. And that's kind of what happened. I think what ate Jean up and really did her in was the cognitive dissonance that happened with all victims. The person so bewitched you, so bamboozled you into feeling loved, into feeling like they really care about me, into feeling like they really want the best for me. And they are some divine protector in your life that when they show their true colors, you do not want to believe that this is them and the problem is you. And if you change something about what you're doing, they're going to love you. And that's not how cults work. Jean doesn't get this. So for a lot of things that happened, Jean's husband was being used as a pawn to really sink her relationship even further and to get information from her to then turn around and use against her and ruin her. So I just want you to realize, like, this is why Jean is the way she is. These people ruined Jean. Mary Tamar was Jean Gasho, and Jean Gasho was ruined by people who she loved and she trusted. People who abused her and took advantage of her. And this Kubala Kingdom is literally just the symptom of shitty people doing shitty things to a woman who was very trusting and naive. So this blog details all of the weird stuff that would go on in this Agape cult, right? Because although it looks like a church, if not cult, why cult shaped? But before that, she tells us about how her family would really exist before, and it was lovely, it was peaceful. But she made sure to mention that, yes, her marriage actually, they would have their arguments, but it would always be solved by just simply talking to each other and really hearing the other party out. Well, once they got involved in this cult, that went out the window. Dr. Masocha, he was the head of your home. And Jean actually wrote a page on the blog which states that she had 4 people in the marriage. Dr. Masocha, her in-laws, which were also pastors in the church, as well as Shangi and herself. That's terrible. So first off, we have to understand that Jean did not even want to go to this church. But Shangi's sister became a pastor for one of the satellites of that cult. And so Shangi's sister, which is her sister-in-law, Gertrude, invited Shangi to come and then basically told Shangi, well, you have to bring your wife. So that's how Jean ended up going to the church. Eventually, she falls into the brainwashing of the cult, and this guy sees that she's super talented. So immediately, as soon as she gets in there, he puts her as the head of the dancers. He puts her to create this massive magazine called Agape Life. Now, Agape Life magazine was not just going to be for the church that she was at, the satellite, the branch. It was going to be for the entire thing, because he was the archbishop and he was overseeing all the branches in the United Kingdom. So this was massive. And Dr. Masocha moves Jean up rapidly through the ranks of this cult, to the point where he asks her to be on the finance committee of this Agape cult. And she goes, and at that point, I think that's essentially where all things break loose. But before we go there, she tells us a couple things that really ticked her off about the Agape Ministries. One of the things she noticed about Dr. Masocha is that he would not command people to do things, but he would coerce people to do things. Because he will say that if you don't do certain things, if you don't give tithes, if you don't take care of your pastors financially, you will die and death will see you. And not only that, he had a bunch of strange doctrines in his church, and it was actually doctrines that were promoted throughout all these other satellite branches. And so that's why the whole thing has to be just an enormous cult that is taking advantage of people who come from poor, impoverished, low education, and people who are just in financial struggles. They're taking advantage of those types of people because these people want a miracle. They want to see breakthrough. So essentially, this cult didn't have the excuse of saying, well, that was just one branch, but the other branches are actually fine, and we think that this leader is the problem. No. Every branch operated like that because they all believe the same doctrines of buying groceries for the pastor and making sure that the pastor was fed. You had to take care of the pastor in every single way that he needed taken care of, whilst he made $100,000 a month, no tax, and he would travel frequently. Remember how I told you that Jean coming on the finance committee was the beginning of her downfall, but she didn't know it yet? That's because the cult leader wanted more money, and Jean was like, so how much do they make right now? And they told her, well, somebody told her $100,000 a month. And she kind of said, well, what do you mean $100,000 a month? Where's he getting this kind of money from? Like, everyone who goes to this church they're so poor and they need help. How is he making this money? And no, she doesn't agree that he needs more money. And from since then, little did Jean know that was what really caused that man to hate her. But he didn't show it yet. He wanted to ruin her. Kind of like keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. And Jean would just really get super bullied. So Jean writes another blog post, and it's called Last Blog Post Maybe. And in this blog post, she details some more of the weird things that would be going on in this cult. He made them believe that if they ate his leftover food and drank his leftover water, they would be blessed. In the Agape cult, the people believed that the cult leader, Dr. Masocha, was essentially Jesus reincarnate. So he fabricated this 20-meter doctrine about himself. Listen, all cult leaders need a legend. They need lore. They can't just be ordinary people, because then if you're an ordinary person, right, the magic wouldn't work. The seppi, the manipulation, the brainwashing, it wouldn't happen. So they have to mythicize themselves. So he had this 20-meter doctrine. This 20-meter doctrine was where he claims that he was fasting and praying for, I think, 40 days and 40 nights. And when he came out of that trance, he heard a voice. Oh, no, an angel appeared to him. And the angel said that he is now blessed with this 20-meter radius. And he said, look around you. And as he looks around him, 20 meters in all directions from where he was standing melted and the grass appeared. So he was in snow, fasting and praying in snow. Come on. But it's the lies that catch the victims every time. So he said, to the angel, what is this? The angel said that this is from henceforth now. Anybody who comes in 20 feet of him will be blessed, and they will have an anointing, and I guess they won't suffer lack. The usual.
Anyone here who can see my lungs? I don't know if there's anyone here who can see my heart. I don't know if there's anyone here, unless you're zoology like me, who can see my intestines. Because sometimes God allows me to see somebody's intestines. Sometimes I see a human being like a bottle. I can see through them, just like that. God gives me sometimes the eyes of an X-ray.
So that's what he has been telling these people. She says that because of this, they believe that he is so blessed by God and he has these powers. Again, you know what? I want to just clarify that we need to start talking in very cult-coded words, because I think sometimes when people hear, anointing, they think, okay, that's a Christian thing. When they hear, I have raised my consciousness to 10D or 5D, they're like, okay, that's a spirituality thing. But at the end of it all, it's really just about separating yourself and being seen as above human, above average, superhuman in a sense, with powers. These powers that he claimed he had really helped with the brainwashing. And so everybody felt that he was the superhuman guy, that they believed that the sweat that fell from him was blessed. And people would actually cry and fight for face rags. And they would have hoped to get one sweaty face rag from Daddy. Yeah. Jean's husband was really lost in the sauce. So while Jean was conjuring envy from his own sisters for being loved so much and appreciated so much by the cult leader, he was benefiting from all of the favor that was being shown, yet allowed himself to be used as a double agent to hurt Jean anyway. He would take the sweaty rags that basically only Jean got, because only his special people would get these sweaty face rags, and Jean had the most of these rags. So she had about 15 rags when a lot of people barely had one. But her husband, he would sleep on these rags. He would put these sweaty rags on his pillow. He would also bundle them up in his pockets and walk around town with them, at his job or whatever he's doing. So Jean said that it was a lot of financial abuse. And again, it was because he brainwashed people into believing that he was this superhuman figure. And she was really frustrated because at one point she said she's not hiding her poverty. She said they were really poor. And she said this poverty only came once they got absorbed in this cult. She said that she didn't even realize it until she left. It was coming up to, I think, when the marriage really fell apart, I think at that point of the ambulance being called. But right before that, she would have a lot of questions because from her recollection, right, she remembered at least her children were well fed, they had clothing, and she literally said that Dr. Masocha told them to throw away anything that reminds them of lack or in the past. He directed them to throw away their bed. And Jean knows the state of the finances. So I guess she didn't really want the husband to throw the bed. But he believed Dr. Masocha and he threw the bed away. And she said they didn't have any money to buy a new bed for a long time. And besides that, Dr. Masocha would be using their house as a kind of social storage unit. And what I mean by that, all of the things that really were supposed to be done maybe at a rented concert hall or something like that would have been done in Jean's home. And a lot of the cult members were in her comments under that blog post, and they were saying things like, nobody made you do that, Jean. Nobody made you have all of these rehearsals at your home, made people stay at your home. Pause, because people staying at her home, we have to talk about the PDF file that is on the board of that church that she didn't even know he was who he was until she left and she actually started digging into the organization. So we'll get into him a little later. But the person is like, nobody told you to let all these people in. Nobody told you to do that. Nobody told you to do this. Nobody held your hand and demanded that you gave £600. And all they had to do was make it seem that if you did not give the cult leader money, didn't give him groceries, didn't provide him with the life that he wanted, you would go to hell. And there was a doctrine in the church that stated that, you had to buy groceries for the pastor / the cult leader. That means that even Shangi, with no money in his bank account, had to buy groceries for not only his pastor, which would have been his own sister, but also this Dr. Masocha. So Jean talks about the 666 and that special number. In this blog post, she talks about the Agape, the 666 satellites. And of course, the superstition of the number 666. And she said each satellite of the church had 6 members. So she listed a bunch of crazy things that have happened with people, especially with their mental health. For example, a young couple came to the church. Overnight, they decided to drop out from college and dedicate their life to Dr. Masocha. Eventually, the husband began to cheat on the wife. The wife got really depressed about it and she was suicidal. Jean took pity on her and decided to, help her, just talk to her, be a good friend. And she tells Dr. Masocha, I feel like this lady needs help. She keeps hinting that she might be suicidal and I feel like we could do something to help her. That'd be excellent, right? Dr. Masocha looks at Jean and tells her, stop playing with her and stop calling her your friend. These kinds of people who are going through suicidal thoughts, they have bad spirits on them and you can't have her in your home with those spirits on them. It'll be bad for your marriage. Another thing she mentioned was this other couple that came in. The guy eventually divorced the woman, and instead of the pastor trying to help them mend the issue, he is having arranged marriages with other young women in the church with this old man. The first thing pastor should really do is try to get everybody happy together again, but not Dr. Masocha. In this section, under this blog, we find out some things about the church. But it comes from somebody who doesn't agree with Jean. Clearly, somebody who is on the side of the cult, a cult member. And this cult member says, Jean is a piece of shit, she's a liar, and that's why she was having an affair with EE Nayasha. Now, EE Nayasha is he's like a security guard. He's He's like the bodyguard of the daddy guy, Dr. Masocha. And that's why she had an affair with him. Like in the cult, being the wife or the girlfriend, being the wife of a bodyguard of the cult leader is like a big deal, because your husband is like close, your husband is like close to the superpowers, and it's said that the bodyguard has some of the powers that the cult leader has because of his proximity. Don't forget about the 20-meter doctrine. So that's what they were claiming in the comment section. Now, it turns out that Jean has amassed a lot of supporters. So one of the supporters came out and they said, well, we hope to see EE Nayasha in custody too, because they said that they were tired of this guy diving on women who come to greet the cult leader. And he takes his job way too seriously. If you come too close, he will literally knock you down and tackle you to the ground to protect the powers of Dr. Masocha. Jean then replied under the comments and said, well, I remember I posted a picture of Daddy, and basically he dialed down her phone. Like, he literally harassed her and stalked her online until she removed that photo, because he's claiming like that is against the laws of the cult. And he was telling her she has to remove it because these laws are put in place to protect Dr. Masocha. And I feel it's weird. Like, it's not laws, it's policy. You have a safety policy that's not needed, essentially. I have no idea what he's talking about, because trust me, nobody is checking for Dr. Masocha unless he knows things about Dr. Masocha that even we don't know about right now, because someone said it doesn't make sense that Jean would be sleeping with EE Nayasha, because these security guards, and I believe EE Nayasha was like the head honcho, but there were others, right? But she was like, these bodyguards know the ins and outs of Masocha's life. Like, they know all the skeletons in his closet, kind of like the armor bearers from that David E. Taylor cult. They knew all the dirty secrets, even the women he would take back and forth. It's the same thing. Listen, they all have the exact same model. So, right, they said like they wouldn't sleep with her because they know too much. That's just a conflict of interest at that point, right? And Jean says, of course, it's a lie. It's not true. But we learned so much about the way the cult was structured that wasn't even written in Jean's blog. And that, again, shows like these people are so brainwashed that they are literally setting up themselves for disaster. Because if that initial comment did not come in defense of the cult leader accusing Jean of an affair, almost like to discredit her from being essayed, that other response, giving the world more information about their cult, would not have been typed. Jean did not come to play with this blog, and I support victims. I'm glad that she came out and she told us the truth, and I'm glad that she came out and she really told us what was going on, because now I realize, oh my God, Jean is a victim and she was really persecuted. In a blog post entitled To Have and to Hold, Jean talks about Masocha in a way that makes his conviction make sense. Because sure enough, yes, he was a financial abuser. Yeah, he was a fraudster and a scammer. Sure. But, hear me out. Those are very different from claiming somebody essayed you. And I believe that he did, in fact, do what Jean said he did. But it adds cohesion to those claims about this individual. Under To Have and to Hold, she wrote about this couples retreat or some kind of couples conference. And in the couples conference, basically, what they do there is like a mass couples counseling kind of a thing where they just tell you how to be a good couple, right? Dr. Masocha opens up with a grape joke. And he says that this police officer was so in love with this woman that he fruited her. He graped her. Fruited? I'll use fruited because honestly, that joke is going to come up a lot in this couples conference. So he says that, and the whole auditorium erupts in laughter. And Jean is like, she doesn't like the joke, but she laughs because when you find yourself in a cult, you're forced to kind of go with the flow because anything that goes counter to that echo chamber clipped immediately. And what I want people to realize is that cults, even if you haven't heard it yet in this video, know this, that cults will make you cut off the external support because it makes people more dependent on the cult, ensuring the cult's longevity. So that's how the cult survives. So she laughed because at the end of the day, I think Jean was subconsciously, at least subconsciously aware of how much her husband was in this cult, or how much the cult really got to him. He was really deep in. He's to this day, he is still brainwashed. Let's just leave it at that. And I feel like, so she didn't really want to rock the boat. So she laughed at the joke, but internally she felt like it was weird. During the procession again, he did the same joke. The fruitage about the woman who got fruited, he made that joke again. Then he tells the young couples that he doesn't believe that they're enjoying their bodies enough. And basically he makes them touch each other in front of him, and he smiles. And Jean says it's not like touching, like a hug and a kiss, but it's like things that should be done in the bedroom. And she said a lot of these young couples were embarrassed. So somebody in the comment section who was a supporter of Jean's cause at the time commented, and they said that they in fact believed that to be true. And they said that they don't think Dr. Masocha likes marriages. Like, he will tell everybody, like, you're the best in the world. He will tell women, like, he will tell people, like, you're the best in the world. Like, you are so, like, he loves your marriage. Because that's what he would do to Jean, by the way. He would tell her, like, he loved her marriage and he loved that they were lovebirds with, of course, she and Shangi. And so, but the commenter said he'll say that, but he doesn't mean it. In fact, the commenter believes that he hates marriages. And I believe that. I could see that, because it would be in his interest for people to actually not be married, even though they came into the cult married. Because guess what? Remember how in David E. Taylor's situation, and I'm just using David E. Taylor only because certain cults are set up certain ways, and I think this is very much reminiscent of the David E. Taylor cult. So David E. Taylor would ensure that the people who were working in the call centers didn't have a family, and he would prohibit them from dating. Kind of like the same thing, but in reverse. So couples would come in married, but then this Dr. Masocha, daddy, would not actually want them to remain married, or if they are in a marriage, he would kind of want the marriage to just not be a marriage. They'd be married in, I guess, title and legally, but he would want just workers who work on his cause, workers who work on his cause, and they don't have any time for family. Because Jean said she had noticed, being in the cult, that she would spend 40 hours a week working on the magazines, planning dance routines for the church and all of these things, holding all-night prayers. They were busy, and that's why their marriage dissolved. It wasn't because of Jean being bad. It was essentially because they were in a cult, and cult members do this. So this is what cult members do. So Jean begins to publish this blog, and as she's publishing the blog, word comes to her through another blog made by someone who used to go to the church, Deborah Mackenzie, and she was the secretary at the church for some time, and she writes a whole blog. The blog was removed, but Jean got the blog page that she needed. And literally this Mackenzie lady says that the cult leader, Dr. Masocha, he had a book called the 300 book that he was going to release about Jean. Yeah. And so Jean basically was writing this blog, getting her story out, and in retribution, he called an emergency council meeting to see if they should agree to release this book bashing Jean. Well, the book was never produced even after all that secret meetings that the board had. But Jean went further to investigate the board, and she found out that the board was actually hired a man who was a PDF file. And this PDF file sat comfortably on the board. He would teach children Sunday school hymns at the cult. And basically, Jean was concerned. Now that she's digging in, she was like, don't get me wrong, like, I did not know anything about this man only because I had no reason to dig into the establishment like this. And she said he loved teaching the children his songs. And she said, like, it bothers her now because maybe his excitement to work with children just isn't from a genuine, honest, pure place. And she really grimaces because she remembers that when she was really in the thralls and the trenches of the cult, she was really active and she was that girl. Remember how I told you how the cult leader uses Jean's house as social storage? People would kind of just drop in and sleep over by her home. He was one of the people who slept over by her home. She fell asleep and he was playing with the children. At least the children were playing freely in front of him. And she said she's really glad that he just didn't get to sleep over because Shangi and her at the time, they did not have any place for him. And I'm just really happy that that sleepover just didn't take place. The scary thing about all of this is that Jean said that the church knew exactly what he did. He was caught doing things with a sleeping minor on the bus. And she said she finds it so disgusting that even after he was sentenced, charged, convicted, these people still let him take up the position that he had in the church. She even spoke about how strange it was that the national anthem of the cult was made by the same individual. So he seemed to love music, right? And I just find it funny. We're going to pause for a cause. Like, this church actually has a national anthem, like a whole anthem. National, he said. And I think like we could just pause for 2 seconds because maybe this is where Jean got her inspiration of starting a whole new country in another country. Because if this cult had a national anthem when there's already a national anthem for the UK, then perhaps that's where the inspiration for Kubala being a country within a country comes from. In this blog, Jean says that he was actually a piece of shit and true. And I think this part really hurts her so much because, as you know, she loves to write, she loves poetry. And she said that the Dr. Masocha would essentially sell her dreams. And he would tell her, you know, you are such, you're going to be famous. He prophesied to her, telling her she's going to be famous. She's going to have a world-renowned book. She's going to have a bestseller. And he said, you know what? In order to help her reach this potential, he is going to be her mentor. And he said, you know, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm your eternal father. I am supposed to basically guide you and govern you and protect you on your way to fame. He literally said that, fame. So she's really excited. He's her manager, right? Looks like Jean had been searching for a publisher for a while. When she finally found one, she was just so happy. She said she was actually searching for a publisher since she was 24. And well, she really wanted to publish her book since she was 15. So when she got that call from this publisher that she found, she was excited. The person was like, we love your book. We want to publish it. Can we at least talk about, the deal? She said, well, she has to ask her manager about it. So they were like, okay, just call us back. So she goes to Sandra. Now, if you don't know about Sandra is the stepdaughter of Dr. Masocha. And basically, she is living in the lap of luxury, of course, other people's dime. The church members, the poor cult members' dime. And so she's like telling her about this deal. And Sandra says, go text daddy. Like, she's calling him daddy because that's her actual stepdad. But just had to put that out there. And she said, text him. Texts Masocha, and he is in South Africa. He says, don't worry about it. When I come back, I'm going to deal with it. He comes back, but the publisher had to call her, meaning clearly that he didn't see about it. And so the publisher said, can we talk to this manager? Because at the end of the day, sometimes people who manage you do not have your best interest at heart. They literally told her that. And she said, no, Dr. Masocha has my best interest. The person was like, can you just give me his number? Let me talk to him. She gave them Dr. Masocha's number. Dr. Masocha then calls her back and is so gleeful because guess what? He said that he has been just finishing up a manuscript and this deal is going to be really good for launching his book. Jean literally became crushed, promised her that they would launch a book together. They would even have a book release together. They would do so many things together, and he didn't do anything. He just snatched the opportunity for himself. Jean told her husband. Her husband said, you know what? I don't like the fact that daddy is launching a book. You need to do it on your own. I believe her husband was jealous of her treatment in the church. I believe they got to him. I also believe Dr. Masocha was playing two sides of the coin. Actually, I don't think Dr. Masocha was outrightly playing both sides just yet, but I do believe that at that point, maybe her husband didn't like the favor and all that love that she was getting and the obvious support that she was getting from this guy. So he told her, no, he doesn't like the fact that he's publishing it. Do it on your own. Now, all of a sudden, all the communication is going through Daddy, Dr. Masocha, and none is going through Jean. Then Dr. Masocha calls her when she thinks all is lost. And he says that, don't worry about it. There is a 2-person deal that could happen so we could actually launch the books together. Something in me tells me that was bullshit and that was never going to happen. I think he just didn't want her to stop working on the Agape Life magazine because that wasn't done yet. She was really excited. She tells her husband. Her husband says again, he doesn't like that idea. And before you know it, Dr. Masocha calls and tells Jean that he agrees with her husband because her husband says that that's not a good idea. And he says, you know what? I agree with him. You probably shouldn't launch a book. Mind you. And that was the end of the book deal. So Jean is actually very hurt by this because she feels like people lied to her. People who she should have trusted literally did her dirty. Her husband betrayed her, all of that. So this guy, cult leader, scammer, he has a lot of false prophecies. But every time you hear this guy make a prophecy, it's because he wants to extract something from the person. So you have the 12-12-12 hoax, which is the title of one of her blog pages. And this is where Dr. Masocha says that, God is coming. He's going to come. He had a vision. He had a dream. God is coming and he is going to come on the 12th of the 12th of the 12th. And he's saying that, prepare yourself. When he comes, he's going to be a rushing wind. You're going to see angels. Doesn't that sound like David E. Taylor? You're going to see angels. You're going to hear a rushing fire and such. And it's literally all the same thing. And so people were excited. Now, the criteria to experience God was, of course, you had to fast for 40 days and 40 nights. Plus, you had to buy his t-shirt to attend the event, right? So you would have to buy this t-shirt, and a lot of people did the 40 days fast. Now, one of the things Jean emphasizes was the child abuse that she feels went on. A 12-year-old girl came to her. I don't know how she got in contact with the girl. And basically she said well, yeah, it was kind of a casual passing. She's like, yeah, I was really excited to see angels and all of that stuff, but it just never happened. And she was like, I don't know what I did wrong, but I did fast for 40 days and 40 nights, meaning that for almost more than a month, she didn't have any food. And 12 years old is too young to be doing any of that, in my opinion. And that was one of the things, these prophecies and this brainwashing that happened by this Masocha guy really affected everyone and anyone around him, including children. So this ambulance story happens after all of this bullying, after the snide remarks, after everything you could think about with this sister-in-law business, the jealousy of working your ass off, and then eventually some young hot rod just comes and swoosh, moves way up into the church faster than you. So that morning, it was a beautiful Sunday morning, and Jean describes it as pretty average, in fact. But it couldn't have gone smoothly because the day before, Jean finally saw that proof of what her sister was actually telling her husband. And she suspected for a while that she might have been talking shit behind her back to her husband. But she saw with her own eyes that the pastor, which was Shangi's sister, was coming to Shangi telling him to leave her. And that just pissed her off. So in church, she kind of like confronted them. I think it was after church, in fact. It wasn't even like during church. After church, she confronted them and she said, I heard what you said. Were you encouraging my husband to leave me? And she said, and her sister-in-law, Gertrude Masocha, said, you're insane. You need to get your head checked. Being accused of mental health illness was one of the major tactics that this cult used. And it's really important to understand the background of the people who would be saying this. So the church was full of mental health nurses. In fact, Shangi's sister was a mental health nurse. So when you have a group of people who are not very well educated, they have very little money, they don't know a lot. When you have a nurse just making flippant diagnosis, people are going to believe them, especially people who are from that kind of category that I just described. They don't know any better. So if a nurse comes and says this person is insane, they are going to believe her. And it was just so funny that insanity came because they did not want to have any accountability for any of the shit that they were talking about Jean behind her back. I mean, when you come from a culture like Jean, but I'm talking maybe about socialization. Everything that you read from Jean, you could tell that marriage means a lot. And I get the feeling that she's surrounded by people who value marriage a lot. To an unhealthy degree, in fact, because Jean even said, not in this blog, but in her Jean Gasho blog, that she doesn't believe that you should get divorced for cheating. So the sister says that you're insane, you need help. And Jean got mad. She got pissed. She was like, why are you just acting like I'm the insane one? When somebody's gaslighting you, doing all that unhealthy shit, you're like, what do you mean? Like, you're the one who sent this message. This is out of place. So then we're going to mention this guy, and he's just going to be mentioned because he wrote this long ass letter to, I think, the board leaders of the cult. And essentially he says he is some kind of doctor. They call him a doctor, but he's really just a nurse. He is echoing what happened, that Jean is mentally unwell. And he's echoing the sentiments of the jealous sister. And basically everybody in the church doesn't like her. Why? Jealousy. I think from looking around in that church, I'm not going to lie, Jean was one of the most attractive women. And Jean was really beautiful. Like, let me show you some pictures of Jean, guys. Jean was pretty. Let me tell you, she had that blonde hair. She would have her nails done. She would really do her eyebrows. She was so put together. She was gorgeous. I don't care what anybody says. Jean was beautiful. And you can see it in her daughter because her oldest daughter looks exactly like her. And I've said it before in my other videos, so I am not fabricating this. Jean's daughter looks like Jean when all of this was happening. So you could understand why people could have been jealous, a lot jealous. These people hated her. And especially her brother's sister, because I guess she worked her ass off all these years, finally became a pastor, and you have this hot little 29-year-old girl just zooming through the ranks. She had an issue with it, but they would treat her really badly. Jean's in-laws hated her, and I feel like they just echoed a sentiment that might have existed in the church at large. You find people who are in these culty establishments, they do not have the goals and the guts to go against the grain. So anytime you see people singling out this one person, it has to be that the head honcho in charge doesn't mind it happening. Once you're in a cult, if you're under the sound of my voice and you want to know if you think you might be in a culty situation, and you feel like you're in an environment where literally anybody who has an opposing thought is called mentally insane or is cursed by a cult leader to go in hell, do not feel like you need to think too hard about whether you're in a cult or not. So what I just said was what that daddy, Dr. Masocha, would often say. Like, if you don't agree with him, you're going to hell, you're going to die. You are not truly a child. That's what he would say. I don't know if they meant to say a child of God or a child of him, because he would call people his children. I don't know what he meant by that, but he meant something by that. And because of the image of himself that he cultivated, nobody wanted to be caught outside of that echo chamber, right? So when Jean is writing this blog and I'm reading it, from my opinion, right, I realized that Jean did not know that this daddy, Dr. Masocha, that she trusted so dearly, was playing both sides of this guy named Julius. He's coming out and he's saying basically like, yeah, everything they said is true. She's mentally ill. But before he starts talking, he said, I wasn't there for any of this. Then Jean says like, this guy, she's telling her readers, he is essentially somebody in the church who like loves power and he likes to push himself in places just so he could. Basically, he's a bottom feeder and he will just ask like whoever he needs to ask like to get power in the church, right? And so this man clearly says he doesn't, he wasn't there, but now he's saying like everything, like he knows everything and he's just recounting everything. And I think in that instance, this is the insanity of a cult. Like they really think like their internal power dynamics gives credence to evidence just because they said it. And everybody else with critical thinking on the outside is looking at them like, you said you weren't there. What do you have to do with this? You're insane, right? So I'm reading this and I'm like, at this point in time, the only people who sound batshit crazy are the Agape cultists, right? They are the ones who sound insane. How do you mean you are giving a letter of, I don't even know, to the board of the cult when you weren't even there? Anyway, so he gives this letter and so you have a lot of people on all sides coming at Jean, calling her insane. And you see these in the comments and the comments are really disgusting. Somebody even commented, so the cultists would come, the cult members, they would come in the comments and they would really bash Jean. And they would say, you're a liar, you're an effing liar. They would say things like, your husband. And the tone in which they typed it, you could tell like they're scoffing at her and laughing at her. She's like, you don't even realize that man isn't yours anymore. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, I thought the point of religion was to help people get better. Does this, like, people are actively going out of their way to act like cunts? I don't understand it. Anyway, to act like, right? So this ambulance, she was jealous. Clearly, jealousy, we established that. And so Jean is recounting, after she confronted them, they called her crazy, and unbeknownst to they called the ambulance for her. Remember, everything is happening in England, right? They want her to be locked away in the insane asylum. And essentially, the people came and they were like, hi. They approached her. Are you Jean Gasho? And she said, yes, I'm Jean Gasho. And she said, and they were kind of confused because she was really calm. She was really polite. She had her wits about her. And they told her, could you just come with us anyway? When she said when she was going to the ambulance, she felt so humiliated. And that was the point, actually, because in the report released by the paramedics, they said that it was just a family disagreement and they were called to as a form of public humiliation. And I see that, like, even when this Julius was talking and saying like he wasn't there, but Jean was asking her sister-in-law and sister-in-laws if they slept with her husband. And I'm like, and I felt like, okay, you are clearly playing somebody for a fool, because there is such a thing as context. There is such a thing as tone. If Jean is telling us that her sister-in-law told her husband to divorce her, clearly saying like she's not a good wife, etc., whatever the reasoning, maybe she's not making him happy, she's not doing the chores anymore. Mind you, all of this was caused because she was dedicating too much of her life to that Agape church, helping it run. Even her own husband they both started neglecting their home just to make that church run. Like, they dedicated their entire lives to that church. So both of them caused the breakdown of their marriage, right? Because they were in a cult and they were brainwashed. But anyway, so clearly the sister had some thoughts, right? I could imagine Jean coming up to her, asking her why she said that. She denied it, and then Jean going crazy on her and talking like, do you sleep with him? Do you sleep with him? As in, I sleep with him. I'm intimate with him. So I would know if my husband had a problem, and he does not have a problem. Now, keep in mind that before this Dr. Masocha, you have to remember that he was the be-all and end-all now to their problems in their marriage. Jean, I think she forgot that. So when she's talking to her, in her head, she is seeing like the before all of this, where they would get together and squash their problems in the sanctity of their marriage in their home. She forgot that now Dr. Masocha is the answer to all their marital problems. And when she said that, I think she forgot that Shangi may be seeing Dr. Masocha as the head of the home and no longer himself. So when she was asking him, do you sleep with him? Meaning like, I sleep with him, I'm intimate with him, I should know if he feels any type of way about it. She wouldn't have known anything because Shangi would have been taking his problems to Dr. Masocha. And he was not speaking to Jean. In fact, he was taking every pillow talk that they ever did to Dr. Masocha, while Dr. Masocha was just kind of holding her on and just kind of like benefiting from her talent. But he heard everything and all the questions Jean had about his money, about his expensive mansion villa, about all of those things. When she's lying down saying, I just wonder how he's getting that money. Where is it all coming from? And she would say, I'm poor, but why is he so rich? Shangi would take it back to the pastor. And that's really idiotic, because what do you gain from that? So right now, I'm on her side. When it comes to Kubala Kingdom, I'm not on her side. But we have to learn how to compartmentalize. This very much is cult, and she's a victim. And everybody around her that she thought she could trust were not trustworthy. So the sister-in-law calls an ambulance. She's crying and she's like, my husband, where is my husband, right? Because even before they call the ambulance, she's looking around to find Shangi. And Shangi, guess where he is? He disappeared. He disappeared and he left her there. He was there all the time. And then when they started ganging up on her, he left her for dead, essentially. Under the blog that she's telling us about the ambulance situation, you see more cult members. And they flock to her, and they're threatening her with all sorts of legal action, talking about, you shouldn't talk about this. Under civil code, this and that, and they're going on at her. So while they claim that Jean is fabricating every inch of this story, this story, these cult members consistently prove that they do in fact bully people. Like, they are actively bullying her. Almost at the end of this all, she decides to come out and say, you know what, I no longer want to protect people who did me dirty. And she's saying everybody is claiming this and claiming that. And they're saying like, we don't know what you said. You should have gone to the police. And she says, I did go to the police. And that was what they were hiding from the other cult members, that Dr. Masocha was in fact arrested and he actually was held by the police. So a lot of them didn't know that. And she kind of like said it. Yes, he did this to me. And how did it happen? Well, it happened during the surgeries. Daddy's seductive surgeries. Remember, I told you about that. Well, Dr. Masocha used to have a lot of surgeries with women. One of the people who knew a lot about him came out in her blog and said, well, yeah, he used to do this all the time with different women. It would be in that large villa that I spoke to you about. It would have been anywhere and everywhere. He would have these surgeries. Jean also went to these surgeries, but he didn't really attack Jean the way he tried to groom the other women, especially the young girls. So the young girls actually did A and O, like that was done on them, and they had to do that as well. But that 15 and 16-year-old witness confessing that he did that to her, that's what got him arrested. But Jean, see, he was more subtle with Jean because Jean has a husband, she's more mature, so he would hug her, yes, but the hugs that she got in front of everyone wasn't the hugs that she got in these surgeries. Like, he would be hard, she would say, he would be literally so hard, and she would be hugging up on her and grinding a little bit, and then he also would try to like kiss her on the mouth and stuff, and like do like if it's blessing. He actually would sell pictures of himself in his robes. Picture was touted by a single mother as if like, this picture made me, really break through in my life. It caused me to get blessings. So what had happened was like a lot of people in church would buy the picture because the picture of Dr. Masocha was supposed to give their house and family blessings if they hung it in the living room. At one point in time, as I said before, they were in extreme poverty. And she called the cult leader like she normally did. But this time she really was crying her heart out and saying, well, I am going through so much with my family. We don't have any food to eat. He told her to take his picture down from the wall and to kiss him on the lips, and do that whenever she's feeling sad or lonely. She went back to her husband and she said, I feel like something is wrong with the cult leader. Like, this Dr. Masocha guy, like, he's treating me really weird. She tried to hint and insinuate, like, I think he's doing something that he shouldn't be doing. Now, she said she did not want to even think that he could do that because, again, he has brainwashed them and trained them to believe that he is this almost godlike, infallible figure. She couldn't believe that Dr. Masocha was behaving like this. And her husband said, you know what? That doesn't matter. That can't be true. That doctor, he is qualified by God. He knows what he's doing, but he's not doing that. It happened again for the second time. She goes back to her husband and says, I think that he's trying to do something to me. Like, he's trying to get me, she thinks something intimate is happening, sexual is happening. Now, remember, she's 29, almost 30. But remember, this man has brainwashed them and cultivated them in a way that have infantilize themselves. So you now depend on the cult and everyone around you to make sense of what you should believe. And that is why when cult members, they experience things that go against like their autonomy and consent, and they feel like things are weird, they often look outwards instead of trusting themselves, because that's what the cult brainwashed you to that's how the cult programmed you to think. All of your thoughts must really come from the outside. So she reaches out to her husband again for the second time, and he says he would never do that, and he brushes it off. So she continues going to these surgeries because everyone is telling her that it's not real. Like, whatever you're thinking is not real. And so she actually apologized and asked God for forgiveness for even thinking that he could be doing things like that to women. But little did she know that her husband was taking back everything that she was telling him to Dr. Masocha. And so at that point in time, Jean doesn't know this, but Dr. Masocha knows what she's been telling her husband. Basically, Dr. Masocha realizes, okay, we have someone who is a bad apple. And that's where the bullying really starts, really gets turned up a notch, because now the mental health rumors started churning up around that time. And it was really her husband, on behalf of the man of God, telling people that she's insane, because remember I tell you, like, they always plan ahead, and it's a psychological method that they use. So by the time now, if anything comes out where she decides to take that internal questioning out externally, and she puts a megaphone out and she blasts it to the world, the established thing that people would have known for a long time was like, her husband has been saying that she's mentally insane, so why should we believe her? Classic, manipulative, cultish, abusive 101. So Jean doesn't realize this, but Jean goes to the police report. She says Jean makes the police report after having so many surgeries. The final straw for Jean was in fact the calling of the ambulance, saying she was insane. Waiting for her husband to support her didn't happen. After a while, Jean obviously leaves the home. She separates and tells him, come away from them. We had a lovely family before they got involved. This cult got involved. Let's go. Let's live together and just return to innocence. Sounds familiar, right? He turns her down, doesn't respond. Now, while Jean is away, she gets time to think about all the things that have been happening in the cult. She realizes she was brainwashed. She realizes that he did SE her. She realizes that Sandra, which is his stepdaughter, has literally been living in the lap of luxury while she was essentially just a servant and a slave. She realized she was a slave, but they made her think like she was so special, right? They made her think she was the inner circle, and I think she realized she wasn't the inner circle. The board members are the inner circle. The people who make the money are the inner circle, but they make you feel like you're so special. They give you all these sweaty rags to mean like you are favored and you're anointed with all of this nonsense, but in reality, all they care about is money. Now we starting to sound like Kubala. They don't want, like, they claim to reject materialism and capitalism. Jean also said, remember that 12-12-12 hoax I told you about? She had a dream beforehand that it was going to be a bust. So now it seems like Jean has powers and she's a prophetess, right? She got a dream. See, now it sounds like prophetess Mary Tamar, queen of Kumbala, Queen Nandi. It's starting to make sense, right? I hope it is. So Jean basically is thinking, and she's thinking. She realizes all of these things, and so she goes to the police and she says, you know what? She makes a report. The police say, okay, we can charge him. But she makes it in the wrong, country or whatever. But she makes it in the wrong place. She's supposed to make it in Scotland. So they say, we're gonna transfer this to the Scottish police. The Scottish police say, well, we can't charge him because under the laws of Scotland, it doesn't have enough to charge him. They said, but if you could just pull one witness, we could get him. We could get him in front of a judge. Jean volunteers her husband because she's like, he knows that I would have told him that I felt a certain way when this guy was doing these surgeries. So she put her trust in her husband. Again, Jean loves that man. So when she tells her husband about it, he says like he doesn't show up. In fact, he writes a letter stating that what she's saying isn't true. And the pastor, the cult leader, the pastor, Dr. Masocha, he is actually like super innocent and like nothing's wrong with him, and Jean is insane, mentally unstable. Later that week, her husband calls her and says that, he wants to talk. He has left the church. Jean believes him. And people in the comments were telling her, no, girl, it's a trap. Like, your husband is somebody who doesn't have like a strong will of his own. He is literally being controlled. Somebody in the comments said, 3 people in the comments warned her actually and said, be wary of that call. That's not Shangi talking. That's Dr. Masocha, and he's really crafty. And I think he's using Shangi to get to you to kind of wrap your head back into the cult so that you don't press charges and this doesn't go further. Basically, she listens to them. She holds him. She has him at an arm's distance. She doesn't tell him much. And guess what? True colors start to show again. She's a piece of shit. She is mentally ill because I think in Jean's mind, she was like, okay, you know what? If you really mean what you say, because there are multiple times she keeps trusting her husband, her first husband, and he was being controlled by the cult leader. And she was like, so I think at this point, she was like, if you really want to, you will leave that cult and come. And that's when he just didn't come. And that's when she realized he was still being controlled by Dr. Masocha. And so that's kind of where the story ends, because after a while, he gets arrested. People are sending her death threats. on her cell phone on WhatsApp of him cursing people with death if they go against him or whatever. And people send her these WhatsApps and she was like, why would you send me this? No response. And, she's going through hell with this church. They're bombarding her. They're stalking her online. They're harassing her. They're calling her a whore because they're seeing her getting hugs from the man of God, and then they were like, you would always throw yourself at him, but now in private you're saying he was doing something else. And okay, the hugs were different. What do you mean? So they were so horrid, and I don't believe they realize how horrid they look. Like they look like a cult. Like everything Jean had said, everything that had happened in this whole thing made them look like the pieces of shit that they were. And that's when I think Jean kind of separated from them. And that's kind of where we stop for now, where the man he recently had an appeal this year, and they actually doubled down and they convicted him for 10 years. The conviction happened this July 2025. So I'm going to read a little bit from the case here, and it's HMA versus Walter Masocha. The judgment was given on July 28th, 2025, and Judge Craig said, you were found guilty of a total of 4 charges. 3 involved someone who regarded you as their father figure, and 1 a parishioner who had come to you for spiritual help. You sexually abused both of them in what can only be described as the grossest breach of trust on your part. You hold yourself out to be a religious leader who speaks directly to God and espouses the highest standards of probity. However, in reality, you are nothing more than an opportunistic sexual predator, indiscriminately taking advantage of those who should have been able to trust you the most. It was very clear from the evidence that you cynically exploited that trust for your own sexual ends without care or regard for the impact that would have on either of your victims. They ranged in age, background, and experience, but the common denominator was that they worshipped you, literally, believed you to be a prophet who could work miracles, and placed their complete faith in you. You told your victims they had been given to you by God, that your lips and hands were holy, and they were blessed to have been touched by you. It was that belief that gave you access, but you took sexual advantage of them in whatever way and whenever you felt like doing so. Now, this is just the beginning of the story. So the first part was finished. And you have to understand that, remember, Jean was a pretty pure-hearted young lady. That's what I'm getting from her. She was naive, because somebody who knew how the world worked, they would have peeped that and they would like, something is off about this, and we would have been gone. But Jean really wanted family. She said it. When she first got there, she hated that man. She didn't like the church. She didn't want to be there, but she stayed because of Shangi. And I think that's why Dr. Masocha worked so hard on her to make and really emphasize on her being his favorite, because he wanted to work on her head, because he saw how, I think, independent and determined she was with her own will, and he was like, I need to break you. And so he manipulated her with all of these prophecies and lies about the future, and doing like if he cared, when all he just wanted to do was take advantage of her and be a predator. So that's it thus far. Now, part 2 is going to talk about that gap with how she met Nino. And I want you to see really how consistently victims of abuse and victims of cults keep falling for weird, wrong people, because she did cult. She found herself in another cult after she left this cult. So I want to build and really show you guys what Kubala Kingdom is all about, and that is a bunch of abuse. Nandi is an abuse victim that didn't seek medical psychiatric help for that abuse she experienced. Did I not tell you guys this in my other video, that sometimes affirmations are not enough and you do need to get psychological help from professionals? I think she didn't get that help. So what happens when your wounds aren't healed? You go right in again. Somebody else predates on you. And that's what happened in part 2. So we are going to discuss in part 2 how Nandi got into another cult and how she became the bride of Nino, hot boy Nino, known off stage as Kofi Ofe. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like, make sure you subscribe, make sure that you comment, make sure that you tell me what you think of this whole situation as well if you want to support my channel. So I hope you guys enjoyed this and see you for part 2.